Hi everyone, we'll start in around 5 minutes. Thank you for coming. And I added the slides on top of the room, and the paper is shared in the chat. It should be open source, so everyone should be able to access it. Feel free to check it out before we start and share the room in case you think some people that you might know would also be interested. Thank you so much. Hi Ari, how are
Hi,
you?
Katerina. Good, I'm doing well. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, nice speaking with you. Yeah, I hope you're having a good day
Sure, yeah.
so far.
Looking forward to today's talk.
We'll start in around 3 minutes, so we still have a little bit of time. But if you want to check out if the link is working for you, not that you need it, but it should be working to access the presentation. And I also added the nature paper in the chat, and I want to also, you have a website, so I'm sharing also the website here in the chat, so everyone please check it out. It has really interesting information, and then you can check out more publications, and yeah, feel free to raise the hand and come up to the stage, and we will start shortly in around 2 minutes. So thank you.
I'm curious, just a little bit the history of this group. It's nice to learn about it. How long have you been running it?
So this name is now in February a year, but I've been running rooms like this since like COVID times, like shutdown times. So this app started during COVID time, and in the beginning it was invite only, and there were a lot of like tech people here, and then media people and so on, a few scientists, and then people asked me a lot in these different rooms about, science questions, like facts, and what's going on in science. And, I would not be able to answer in depth all the different questions. So I started
Yeah.
then inviting people. And this is kind of how it started. And in the beginning, it was kind of weird because I would have to tell people, okay, I need your cell phone number to send you an invite. I felt kind of weird asking that. But people still, most of the time, did it without even questioning it. There was sometimes like a question, really? Why do you need the cell phone number? I said, yeah, I'm sorry, it's invite only. And then, so I did this kind of independently, and then I started creating my own club. Just doing that because I kind of felt doing this in other clubs where there's kind of sometimes experts, non-experts talking about topics. I felt that wouldn't do justice to the actual scientists. And then also, if people don't know and they are not from the area, they don't know who to believe or trust. So I thought it was kind of murky, and I I didn't want to go on like that. So I decided to make a club where really just the people that do the research talk about their own research. So that people know when they come here, they can kind of trust the information. That was kind of important for me. So yeah, that's the story basically.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think we can start. So welcome everyone to Science Society, and a special welcome to you, Ari. I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yes, yes.
And so that people get to know you a little bit better, I'll give like a short general information about you. Dr. Ari Benjamin, he went to Williams College to do his bachelor in physics with cum laude, and then he did his master's at Northwestern University in mechanical engineering under the advisor of Simon Ketten, and then then he went on to the University of Pennsylvania as a for his PhD in bioengineering under Comrade Cording, and he did his dissertation was about machine learning as a tool and theory for computational neuroscience. And now he is a postdoctoral fellow at Cold Spring Harbor Lab with Tony Zador. And he is developing new statistical analysis to link gene transcription, brain connectivity, and function. And it's really an honor having you here because I think your research field is really interesting. You're at the intersection of biology and technology. I think which will become more and more intertwined. And the first question we have for you is, like, how did you discover that you wanted to go into research, become a scientist? Was it something you always wanted to do, or was it maybe a class or book you read that kind of sparked your interest? Thank you.
Thank you. I never knew what I wanted to think about in research, but I think if you asked me even as a 6-year-old what I wanted to be, I probably would have told you a scientist at that point. If I think at the age of 6, it would have been a geologist. Maybe for a little while later, like an astronomer. I was very interested in the cosmos and like all the every strange astrophysical object. Just the oddity and expansiveness of the universe really captured my imagination. So I wanted to study physics, which I think I liked the way my mind had to work to do that, and it felt like getting at these big questions. But I never thought I wanted to study neuroscience or artificial intelligence until much later. I think I was in my mid-20s when I really learned about computational neuroscience for the first time, especially as computational neuroscience that talks to and intersects with artificial intelligence and deep learning and neural networks. I didn't know it existed. So once I heard about that, it was really, I put myself on the fast track, and I've been thinking about that ever since then. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also wanted, to different things during childhood related to science, and then neuroscience also came later. So that's interesting that you had kind of a similar path, and yeah, so I'm glad you chose that path because I think your work is really interesting, and we get to talk here now. Um, and then, how did this project come about? d- was it really hard to get funding, or was it something that that you kind of started based on some previous interesting finding? Whatever thing you can share there, that I think that's really interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, well, I guess this project was fun because it meandered a lot. It began with something slightly different, but as we responded to our results and started to think more deeply about what we're seeing, it changed a lot. And I guess in the beginning, like the background, like uh, I guess the intellectual background is this question, a big question, which is how similar is the human brain and the human minds to the artificial intelligence systems that we're building today? Uh, and this is a massive question that has a range of opinions about, and this now in the era of ChatGPT and generative generative image construction generation, it's even more pertinent and relevant. It's a big question, and we're really only tackling a very small thing in the beginning. We were curious since the like vision networks were big and like image classification at this time when we were first talking in 2017 or so. We wondered to ourselves whether these neural networks would see the same sorts of visual illusions that humans do, that we do, that animals do. Uh, or at least have responses that would be similar to the sort of apparent errors that we make when confronted with the visual illusion. Um, and that was really the opening question. And if you look at the paper now, I'm not even sure the word illusion makes it into the paper. uh, but that at least was the beginning of our curiosity. Uh, and we started talking to um, we being in the beginning, myself and my advisor Conrad, to someone who is on the same building as us, same floor at University of Pennsylvania, Alan Stocker, who is a psychophysicist. This is like an area of the study of like the careful study of usually human subjective perception, but also action. This is a really old discipline. The name psychophysics goes back to the 1800s, before even neuroscience. That term wasn't introduced until the mid 20th century. And this field of psychophysics has built lots of illusions to illustrate many of its key ideas. Um, so we thought, well, okay, if we're going to treat illusions properly, we should be working with a true psychophysicist and a good lab, and that began the collaboration really between our two approaches, us the sort of deep learning and neuroscience side, and then the lab of Alan Stocker representing human psychophysics. Yeah.
Wow, that is so interesting. Yeah, that was the main question about illusions, and if tech intelligence basically experiences that too. I think that's kind of an exciting work, and yeah, the the stage is yours to dive into it. We can't wait. And for everyone, the slides are pinned on top of the room. Please access them and follow along. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I'm excited for this format. Audio only format is new to me and freeing in a nice way. And I hope to make this a little bit more narrative, and like less visual than I normally would do, which is really nice. I think slides sort of um, normally suck up everyone's attention. So I'll refer to these slides, slide 1, 2, 3, and so on, every now and then, but um, we'll see if I can spin a narrative that moves beyond them. So yeah, as I was just saying, this project began with the idea of might neural networks see these visual illusions, and we started talking to this to Alan Stocker in his lab in psychophysics, and I should give some introduction to both of these two sides, like the neural network side and the psychophysics side. But let me start with psychophysics, and that is slide 1 in some regard. So a very typical psychophysics experiment is to detect when, or to ask a bunch of human subjects, so you might be invited in to answer a bunch of questions about what you can see and what you can't see. And so this is one classical result here on slide 1, where people would be shown these grading patterns, these oriented grading or Gabor patterns, more specifically, and these would be rotated slowly, and you would be asked, tell me when you see any difference, or do you see a difference between the left and the right image? Now, as we look around in the world, it seems like we can really trust our senses because that's what we have access to. And sometimes we go so far as mistaking our subjective senses for the world itself. Like it seems the sense is so strong that we see what is really there. But in fact, we make all sorts of errors all the time, and they're systematic, these errors that we make, and we're variously good or bad at detecting certain changes. So for this very simple experiment here, it turns out that if normally on average you can detect a difference once I've rotated this screen by about 8 degrees or so. For this particular image, it would change if you increase the contrast or so on. But as you move the initial orientation, that changes a lot. So near the vertical and the horizontal orientations, we are actually very good, or at least relatively much better at detecting a change. So on the right, you can see what is the threshold, the number of degrees that I have to change this image for people on average to detect it. Or this plot was just a single subject, and one of the authors was back in that era. But for the diagonals, we are much worse at detecting changes, and that can be almost twice the number of degrees required to be changed, needing for detection. Now I think it's something that's so clear in the data and reproducible across people, but something we can't detect ourselves from introspection as we look around the world. And I think that's really interesting and a theme of psychophysics more broadly. Now, still within the domain of classical psychophysics, we can go to slide 2, where people began to ask, why would this need to be why would it be that we can detect certain orientations of lines better than others? And a key result suggesting a reason why is simply the statistics of the visual world, the natural world. People quantified in various ways where, like, how often when we look around do we see horizontal lines versus diagonal ones. And it turns out whether you're inside or you're outside, it's stronger inside in artificial environments. But even out in the wilderness, you're much more likely to encounter, if I just query a little part of my visual field, a vertical line than a horizontal line, or than a diagonal one. So there's a strong correspondence between how common something is and how good we are at detecting it. And to make sense of that, this fits really nicely within a very mainstream framework within psychophysics. We can go to slide 3 for a little schematic. And this just shows a mental model that much of psychophysics and the sensory neurosciences have when explaining what we see, which is imagining that as information comes from the external world and it makes its way through our retina, and then retina sends information through axons to the thalamus, and then the thalamus projects to the visual cortex, and through each of these stages, it's imagined that some information must be lost through noise. Neurons, as they fire, inevitably have a little noise, and it's also a bottleneck, a necessary compression of the world out there. And so we can ask, okay, given these constraints, what would the optimal system do? And this is a mathematical framework, a mathematical question that's precisely the same as what Claude Shannon first asked when introducing the idea of information. And it turns out that under certain types of constraints or certain types of noise, the right thing to do is to have, given these constraints, the sensory system should preferentially represent the things that occur more frequently. If that means that, like, by preferentially represent, maybe you're allocating more neurons to representing those more frequent vertical lines, or maybe you're taking steps to decrease the noise, particularly for those types of stimuli. And if that's done, then you'll, on average, be able to put more information about the world through that noisy or constrained channel. So this principle pulls from information theory mainly, and it's been really successful in psychophysics and in the sensory sciences, neurosciences more broadly. So that's what I'd like to introduce from psychophysics in the beginning. And this paper, in the end, became, although we originally started from just a simple, like, might these neural networks, and I'll talk more about neural networks in a second, be similar, in the end it became sort of a question about what are the principles, what are the frameworks that we could use to explain human perception in the first place. So it became much more about actually, like, the understanding the human side, and not just like, why is there a correspondence maybe between artificial networks and these systems. And so that's like on slide 4. The traditional way in psychophysics is to think about optimal perception using information theory, and where this paper will go, and I'll get into this, is well, maybe different principles can explain this effect, and it might relate to learning and learning theory. So what are the consequences of being an effective learning system? And I think I should, at this point, talk about neural networks broadly, what I mean. So we can skip to slide 6, where there's a simple schematic of a neural network. And neural networks are interesting as models, as models for neuroscience. They are at once very similar and at once very different than brains and neural networks. They like the neural networks in our brains, neuronal networks, sometimes people say, to distinguish them. originally introduced as models uh, and popularized mostly within like cognitive psychology, really, rather than so like high level modeling, um, and not coming so much from like how can we describe what single actual neurons do, because actual neurons in the brain have all these very complicated properties. The neural networks that today are transforming artificial intelligence, start from this abstraction that you just have these nodes, and there are millions and millions of these nodes, and they're interconnected in multiple layers. And information, you'll like put in some pixels from one end. Information flows through these layers and layers of nodes, and at the end, through some process that we don't need to understand and really can't, that neural network might output, let's say, the probability that that input image was a chair versus that it contained a table. And then to make it be better at this, this network is trained to incrementally adjust each of the weights, each of the connections between all of the nodes in the network. And there are many ways in which you could adjust those weights. Gradient descent is sort of the cornerstone, or methods that involve using a gradient broadly. But really, gradient descent is the cornerstone of artificial intelligence today. It's a simple algorithm that would be familiar to any engineer, and you might have talked about it in a high school calculus class, which just says that every time I update this network, I'm going to adjust each of these nodes proportional to the gradient, to the derivative of the cost function, or the loss function, the objective. So maybe the objective is like how frequently I classify a chair correctly, and you want that to be 100%. And you can write that as a number, like the percentage being correct. You'll take the gradient of that with respect to any node or edge, and that says, like, if I infinitesimally, if I really slightly perturb a weight in a certain direction, how much will the cost go down? How much will the objective function get better? Very slowly. And then you'll do this for all of the weights of the network via some algorithm, but really doesn't matter how. It's mostly just that you calculate these gradients, and then you slightly move all of the weights, and you've changed the whole network a little bit for the better, hopefully. And this is really required to get artificial networks to work, but it's very controversial how much gradient descent is what the brain is doing. Nevertheless, it's I would say there's a key principle behind gradient descent, like in this model system, if we're thinking of this as a model of the brain, which is one that it incrementally adjusts every connection in the network by a very small amount. So it's a very gradual learning algorithm. And second, that it's operating over everything at once in a multiply connected system. Those are very abstract features, but they're the key ones that we pull to when we, in this paper, create a mathematical framework. And I can sort of illustrate our hypothesis. So, if we go to now, going back one, sorry for having this out of order, but slide 5. Remember, what we're trying to do is explain in a different way how the frequency of things in the world might determine the sensitivity to which our visual systems respond to those things. in a way that doesn't invoke optimality and noise. And so our hypothesis really just says that, well, if we assume that learning in the brain is very gradual, and second, that it uses limited experience effectively, so it makes it's it makes the best change that you can, um, given that you're learning very gradually, and um, then uh, then perhaps that might lead to this phenomenon that we see, namely that the more frequent things are those to which we're more sensitive and can detect changes in better. So at this point, I've done uh, a lot of the main framing, but I've invoked like a lot of large frameworks and concepts. So I mean, this would be a great time to interrupt me to I guess like I ask things more broadly. After this, I'll talk a little bit about what specific experiments that we ran and our results and our in this paper. There's also like we did a bunch of math and we have um, some theoretical results too. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the explanation so far. It's really interesting about the frequency. I haven't thought about that before. That basically, the frequency of basically inputs determines how the inert system kind of evolves. Is that also what you mean? That basically the niche we adapt to, and the niche of a human is pretty broad.
mm-hmm.
Um, it determines basically how the internal or inert system kind of co-evolves to it. So
Yeah,
did you think, or is that varies that a lot? I don't know right now, from like animals from that have very specialized niches. Did you look into that? I mean, probably it's a little
mm.
bit away from the work, but let's say an animal that's mostly visual or mostly, underwater. Like, is there a huge difference in that frequency perception, I guess?
Yeah. Well, there's I mean, that's a great question, and there's two. Um, so we can talk about on an evolutionary time scale. Uh, as you're saying, there's a niche where an animal typically sees one thing or another, and so evolution will bake that in, um, and that we didn't. This is of course not in this paper, but there's a wide literature around. Um, looking at various animals and their sensory systems, and indeed they find sort of exactly what you're saying, um, which is that when we're able to characterize the statistics of those inputs of the auditory world, even of the tactile world, if you're able to quantify those statistics, as a general rule, you'll find that uh, an aspect of that sensory system evolves to encode that really well. Um, and this has been observed all sorts of animals, like in the fly, in the fruit fly, they can see, okay, what does the fruit fly retina encode really well, and tie it to the things that they typically see. And it even is seen within the same organism in different parts of the visual field. Like for mice, for example, they don't um, uh, their eyes don't uh, move too much. Their heads aren't that mobile, and so the lower half of the visual field is always below the horizon, and the upper half of the field is above, and they're using that to scan for aerial predators and so on. And the two halves of the retina, or at least the upper and lower part, I don't know if it's precisely the half, but the upper and lower part of mouse retina respond to the statistics of those two domains differently. And that's an evolutionary thing, and it's not something that any animal would learn in one lifetime. But I do want to make a distinction between what is like what evolution may have found over eons and many generations versus what an animal is able to learn in their own lifetime. And that people have also looked at. And that somewhat more relates to our study a little bit, which is like, in one lifetime, uh, what are the principles by which an animal could learn to efficiently encode their own particular and unique input statistics in the world? And we know, excuse me, for sure that this does happen. I think a relatable example in humans is how um, we're specialized to detect like the vowels and consonants of our mother language, the one that we heard while we were um, very young, um, much better. But we can't even really tell the difference between vowels and consonants in very different languages if you weren't trained to hear that, or if you weren't exposed to those differences. Um, uh, yeah, there are other experiments that are wild, like ones in which they uh, uh, in the 70s raised cats in environments where they could only see the world through either vertical gratings, which sort of like remove the ability to see uh, like continuous horizontal lines, or it becomes all broken up. Or they'll raise those cats um, in environments where they really only see they have these horizontal bars, so the vertical lines are broken up. Um, and yeah, these old studies report that uh, after that rearing, they um, they would like the ones with vertical bars would like bump into chair legs. They wouldn't be able to see vertical objects as well, um, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just had one more question. So, in theory, if we would, like, did anyone try it? In theory, if we would have a lot of information about a species environment that is kind of, very specific, could we model very accurately how their nervous system works and how it should be structured and things like that? I think that
Hmm.
would be so interesting to study. So we wouldn't need to, you know, um, if we could do that pretty accurately, we could make broad assumptions of all kinds of species without, getting them and poking in their head, or maybe even if we find life somewhere else, we could, if we have good modeling, we could, model much better how their kind of perception system works. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I would say you would be able to say, I think, with pretty, yeah, like you would be able to predict what they could perceive. Um, there are always a million ways that biology can create a circuit to achieve a certain goal. So it's hard to say exactly how it should be wired up, but at least I should be able to say, yeah, from that alien from Mars, they're great at detecting changes in like oranges and reds, but like maybe they don't see blues that well, because there's just not that much of that color on that planet.
yeah, thank you. Please, sorry for interrupting so many times, and please go ahead. Thank you.
Of course, no, no, I'd prefer. Um, okay, yeah. So, all right. So there's all right. So we were wondering first whether if learning over one's lifetime, um, with something like gradient descent could explain these sorts of patterns. And the first way to see that is like, okay, well, we have all of these deep neural networks. They've been trained on images. Why don't we just go and look at those? And so it's kind of like, we're almost treating these systems, we're using the same methods that people in neuroscience would use to understand them. They're like model systems in their own right. Sometimes people say instead of neurophysiology, we can do artiphysiology, like artificial physiology. So this is exactly what we did. We went in and when these neural networks are trained on natural images, as many of them are now, it's been a benchmark for over a decade. And this is what's running in your phone. When it detects like that your face is there, it's using such a neural network. What we'll do is in the same way that you would show these oriented gratings to humans, we would show these to neural networks. We'd look inside and see how much does the interior activations change in response to changes in those initial orientations. And indeed, we found really similar patterns where at the horizontal and at the vertical lines, these networks are much more sensitive to changes than at the 45-degree or 135-degree angles. And so this is kind of shown on slide 8. We have one particular network and looking at various layers within it and finding that these layers, like us, like animals, are more sensitive. So like the neurons in each of these layers respond to a greater degree, or the change in their response is much larger when you change the orientation at the horizontal and vertical lines. This was really encouraging for us, I think. It also fits in what's an exciting and a sort of big body of work right now, pointing to all sorts of similarities between neural networks and humans or animals. There are many things that, of course, aren't the same. The list of dissimilarities between AI systems and humans is very, very long. But I think it's very exciting the degree to which they're similar, because it's unexpected and an emergence, and it's an emergent thing in a way that was very difficult for us, for the research community before I joined it. I'm going to call that us, us humanity. But it was very difficult for us to predict what these types of neural networks would learn and how they would respond to their inputs after being trained on huge data sets. So we put this result on that big pile of similarities, and I think we could have stopped there, but where this paper deepened a little bit for me was to take a look at slide 8 and ask why is this the case? Did we expect this to happen? Because this is a fully observable system, we should be able to explain exactly how this emerged in this model system. And that's what we set out to do. There were a few possibilities could have been the case. It could be that, like in this old theory from psychophysics and animal sensory neuroscience, this could be an efficient system that's been optimized by some process, despite some sort of constraint, like noise. But that didn't really check out for this circumstance, because neural networks don't have noise and they're not constrained systems, in the sense that as information goes through them, there's actually a large expansion in the number of nodes. So it didn't quite make sense to us to treat it as Claude Shannon might have done as a constrained information channel. Instead, we thought something else might be going on. And to this, we look to a different subfield in deep learning. There's a question about why neural networks generalize. So that is, like, they have some training examples and they see them, but then they don't just memorize the labels on those. They sort of figure out the underlying pattern and apply that to new circumstances, so that they work in new environments, or maybe they, in the case of like ChatGPT, they'll generate text that they've never seen before, but it's sort of an interpolation of everything they've seen in the past. And to explain this phenomenon of generalization, there's this big body of literature describing what could be happening. And there's this one idea that it's not the architecture itself of these networks, but how they're trained. So it's gradient descent itself. It's not some sort of accident that this is the algorithm that we're using to train these networks. Rather, gradient descent has this preference baked into it for what neural networks learn first about the world. And the types of tasks that we ask them to learn just happen to coincide with these preferences of gradient descent to learn certain things before others. And that's really the key idea from the second, theoretical half of this paper, which is to say, do these inherent preferences of gradient descent in simulations, in model systems, result in systems learning preferentially about things that are more frequent first? And I could, long story short, say that yes, and I have a few slides of some intuition about this. If you're interested in the mathematical details, I won't get into that here in this talk. It's not overly complicated. It's mainly just an application of linear algebra, and so if you're very familiar with both linear algebra and calculus, you'll understand. But it would just take too long to go through for now. But I'll say at high level what's happening with gradient descent. Gradient descent has this interesting property in multi-layer networks where it only adjusts pathways that already exist through the whole system already. So in slide 9, there's like a very simple schematic where I have a network, and it's a 3-layer, very simple schematic network with paths of various weights. And what gradient descent will do is adjust all of the weights along a particular pathway, proportional to how strong that pathway already exists. So, for example, even if the early weights are quite strong, but I did some surgery and I severed the final connections, that pathway wouldn't exist overall any longer, and so no change would happen. Now, at high level, that is to say that how much gradient descent learns depends on how much has already been learned. So on slide 10, there's a schematic that shows that the consequences, the consequence of this fact, which is as a function of time, we can ask how much does gradient descent learn something, and one can imagine various pathways. So perhaps as you are exposed to more and more examples, you slowly get better linearly. So every 10 times you see something, you have a proportional increase in your performance. Or perhaps maybe when you learn something, you'll quickly get better very quickly, but sort of begin to slowly plateau, like an exponential rise in asymptote. What gradient descent actually predicts is something that's more like a sigmoidal curve, where in the beginning, you're not really getting any better because you haven't learned anything yet. But as soon as you begin to learn something about, about keeping it vague, about something, learn something about something, you'll begin to improve exponentially. And then that becomes an asymptote as you converge towards learning. So you get these sigmoidal curves that like S-shaped, and the initial learning rate, like how quickly you're initially beginning to learn something, ends up having a really strong effect in this domain. If you start to learn something a little slower, that exponential rise will begin much later. And so it looks like you're learning one thing. Like if you learn slightly quicker thing A as opposed to thing B, the sigmoidal learning curve will result in you learning thing A almost to completion before you even start to begin learning thing B. And that in slide 11, at high level is the phenomenon underlying what we see in these neural networks, where this frequency, the frequency of some input thing, so I put color schematically here, if certain colors are more frequently seen, your initial learning rate will be much higher, and so you'll more quickly get to this exponential rise part of the curve and learn that color almost totally before you start learning other things. There's some asterisks here to this in that, like, I'm talking about, okay, the multiple technical asterisks, but I'm happy to talk more about those. In any case, because of these various rises, if you look at any point in time at the sensitivity, you'll see each of these components of the inputs learn to some different degree, and those more frequent things that were learned a little bit more quickly in the beginning, simply by virtue of more exposure, are learned more quickly, and so it looks like the sensitivity is much higher at any finite period of time for those frequent things. But this isn't because of some absolute constraint. At an infinite training time, if you just keep on learning forever, in this, we can create a model that will learn all of the inputs to perfection. So we can create an unconstrained model. But at any finite period of time, it will look like it will create an efficient code in the sense that more frequent things in the inputs are better represented. So this is like the underlying phenomena that we can. I think I'd actually like to skip slide 12, which we created a. Well, maybe I'll go through it anyways. So in addition to our large neural networks, we can create a very simple, understandable neural network, and that's just like a linear matrix learning problem. We have some natural image patches. Linear matrix is learning to encode them. And I'm going to go to slide 13, which has a bunch of, we can stay here for a bit because there's some interesting results here. So the degree to which this simple system learns some aspect of the inputs. So for reasons of mathematical cleanliness, we can ask how does it learn the principal components or the directions of of shared large variance among natural images. So some of these variance directions might be like, the full left of the image patch is black, but the full right of the image patch is white. That's a component of natural images. It's present to some degree on all images, and it has a very high variance, so it's very different. The degree to which the network learns each of those aspects of shared variance relates to their strength in the inputs, and those things that are learned more frequently are those that have higher strength. And in humans as well. So just below it, we can say that these sort of sigmoidal learning task dynamics, we do learn them. That happens for us as well. Sometimes people call these like aha moments, or moments when you kind of like really understand a task and you get very, very good very quickly. The harder a task is, the later that aha moment will come. Now, before that aha moment comes, you're still learning, but you're just not seeing any real improvement yet in the, say, success rate of that task. Some other things that this framework explains are how good we get at seeing small changes over time. So on the right of this slide 13, on the bottom right, there's this small plot reproduced from older papers showing that as human infants and then young children age, they get better and better at being able to observe fine details. It's called acuity, visual acuity. It's specifically like what's the smallest I guess like texture I can observe, the finest texture, for example, like a black and white bar pattern. What is the finest texture I can observe before that texture just blurs out and looks to me like pure gray? And it's another psychophysical measure. It turns out that it gets better and better. We get better and better at seeing that over time. And it's linear with age, up to we're like 10 years old nearly, before you stop being able to see improvements in how well humans can see these really fine details, which is very interesting because at this point our eyes are fully mature, like when and it's really what explains this slow increase in visual acuity is your nervous system, is how much your visual system has learned to encode the world. And this theory that we have about gradient descent reproduces those same types of improvements over time, without having to invoke this older framework of efficient coding despite noise, which might say that, like, well, humans are always optimal, but the amount of noise in your visual system decreases with age. And I think I'll skip the middle column here. Yeah, maybe I'll just conclude at high level before we can relate this to other things. But with slide 15, which is we've been using gradient descent as this model learning system, but the message that we ultimately took away from this is that inevitably learning requires a tendency to learn one thing over another. This is just an inherent problem relating to learning. It's sometimes people would call this, there's no free lunch in learning. You always have to make assumptions in order to be able to learn something at all. It's very related to the problems of induction and epistemology and philosophy, which is that you you can never know something for sure without making assumptions. Um, and because there's always a way in which a future experience can violate any particular rule that you've built. It's the same thing for learning. If you establish some sort of rule from your previous experience, you have to assume that that rule will apply to something in the future, which is to say that your learning must be, um, if you have built a successful learning algorithm, the assumptions that it makes must be naturally matched to the types of problems you'll see. So the visual world, we've evolved in the context of this visual world for eons, and we've evolved learning algorithms that are good uh, at learning the types of rules and visual systems that will work well. So it's a tendency to learn those things that are good. Gradient descent, this is one rule that happens to match that, but there are others, and then there's other ones could also be happening in the brain. Now so any learning rule has these tendencies. Necessarily, these tendencies accumulate as one learns to shape perception and behavior in the same way that like erosion is a particular rule for the flow of water, but uh, that particular rule shapes a whole landscape. Um, the analogy being that the way that we see the world with greater sensitivity to frequent things um, is the landscape for which uh, our learning algorithm has sculpted over time. Um, so yeah, I'll conclude the main run of things here, but I'm more than happy to stay on for a while and um, talk about this or any related sort of topics.
Thank you so much, Ari. And I think, your work has so many implications from, from basic neuroscience, of course, to education. And
Mm-hmm.
why I'm saying this is, um, if that's, the closest model we can get from how we learn as humans, one would argue that to stay adaptive in our ever-changing, especially modern world, the broadest exposure of learning you can give children, for example, the better. Because if we don't do that, we in the future more we could see more tendencies that we see now in social media. And this has
Mm-hmm.
also political implications, that people just read what they are used to read in a very narrow way and don't understand each other, don't even try to see different points of views, or to maybe break their own assumption of how the world is and what is good or bad, adapting to to how it's actually changing, and you know radical views and so on. So I think your work has so many implications that we could take advantage of to model how to learn in the future, the best way to have kind of a safe democracy, but also for humans to stay adaptive in the future and to kind of stay relevant. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I'm really excited by that possibility and connection. Um, the for for education and for young children learning, especially, I think it's it doesn't. Luckily, I think the the trends in early child education are already a look towards like um, they already do what I would recommend for the large the large part, which is really good. A lot of exposure from early ages, like starting with curriculums of learning things that are easier first. That's something I didn't touch upon, but it does. can be related in the same mathematical framework. Uh, but I would just say that it gives me confidence in that direction, and confidence. If I were a young parent, which I'm not yet. You know, uh, it would give me, or if we're learning something myself, which of course I always am. Uh, I think this points towards a degree of trust that we should have, that even if we're not understanding something yet, the way that we learn is not, it's not immediately apparent. You're learning progress, but you need to be exposing yourself to something um, to eventually get that aha moment. You shouldn't expect to see immediate gains in the beginning for all things. Especially the harder it is, the later you'll see that moment. Uh, Sometimes we want to, we like um, easy learning curves, but it's not always that way.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I first started as a master student in the lab in a, uh, relatively now compared to nowadays, relatively bad imaging to do electrophysiology. And I thought, who can even see anything on this, like,
Yeah.
and distinguish the cell types? That's ridiculous. Like, people imagined. And then after a while, I remembered, after like 2 weeks or so, then it started like, at some point, it just started easier to recognize this. So, whoever did something like this, or in biology, drawing different cell structures. Like in the beginning, it all looks like a huge unorganized mush in the cell, and then you recognize the structures fairly easily after some while of training. So I don't know if anyone else experienced that. Maybe just my visual system was really not good in that, but that was like the most significant, I guess, ex own experience I had to do that. So that's
Yeah.
why, yeah, it's really interesting. But I want to open up the questions to Peter, Denise, and Victoria. Please unmute yourselves if you have questions. Thank you. Peter? Oh, yeah, go ahead if you have a question.
Yeah, I think that the way that the present language systems or like ChatGPT and AI systems are learning and how humans are learning are quite different because the you can easily show a human something, show them a new way of seeing something, and they can instantly take that on board and see new things because if you help them with that, they can pick out what matters in a completely different way. So the inputs can make sense suddenly, and the
Hmm.
outputs can change dramatically very quickly. And as far as I know, there is no way of doing that with the present AI systems, etc. And what I think is like you were referring to um, animals being adapted to environments, and that is slow genetic development or evolution in many ways. The advantage that I see humans having over that, if we are going to generalize, that is that the human brain is highly programmable. And I would argue that the reason humans are born as unready as they are is that the earlier they can get out in the environment and be exposed to whatever environment that their culture has is existing in, the more specific programming can take place for survival in that environment, and that takes place mainly through culture and cultural learning. Then on top of that, you can have it much more advanced because that kind of learning and programming is both indeliberate and invisible to the human itself. However, you can make that both deliberate and visible. And sadly, that is a level that is not very widely used. if that makes sense. So I would comment on what I've said if it makes
Hmm.
sense to you,
Sure.
or if it sounds crazy, and if it how you see it linking together with your work and with AI systems. And also
Thanks.
tell
Yeah.
me if I'm completely crazy.
No, no, I actually agree with a lot of what you're saying. On the first point, I think you're absolutely correct to point out that we have we humans have the ability to learn in very quick ways and ways that, um, yeah, like if I tell you a new fact, you'll know it, you'll remember it at least for a little while. That's something like these language models like ChatGPT, they can't they can't do, and they can't especially do in any sort of like long-term memorable way. Like if I tell it right now in my computer, like it's not a fact about myself, um, and then you do that on your side, um, it's not going to know. And even if it and the reason is because these training systems, although like my input is being used to train the system, they're using this very slow incremental algorithm of gradient descent that adjusts all of the weights in the network by a small degree. And excuse me, that's not. Um, so yeah, I think uh, in order to make sense of this discrepancy, but also the similarities that we observe in some of these systems, and especially like the visual, like aspects of our low-level vision, like the one that we're investigating, I think you have to invoke the notion that we likely, as humans and animals, have multiple learning systems, and some of them are very good at being quick, and then adjusting and consolidating the network to incorporate that new information. Some of them are very slow, and um, the if anything, this analogy to gradient descent, where this whole network is changed by a very small degree, that's something it's much more akin to perceptual learning, to slowly being able to observe objects. It's hard to be able to the counterexample to this learning a fact is that, the story Katerina was saying, like if someone just says, like it points to in a new domain, like if you're learning to see cell types, or like a radiologist is learning to read X-rays. It takes many tries, and it's a slow process. And even if someone says, "This is a fracture here," like, "Do you see it?" Like, "Okay, yeah, now I see it." It doesn't make them necessarily like it's not just that one experience and suddenly they're really good. Rather, it's this accumulated long experience. Um, so probably if this single framework explains anything, it's mostly perceptual learning. And I would agree that we probably have, if anything, multiple learning systems. And again, more broadly, I think it's really unclear in neuroscience to what extent gradient descent is, where, in which areas of the brain that's the right way to think about what's happening, and to what degree is it happening at all. So still, it's another area where, as we look to these modern AI systems, there are some interesting similarities that we didn't expect, but there remain to be really large differences um, in how they work and how they function. Um,
My only comment to what you're saying is that I would not refer to it as facts. If what I've been playing around with, and I've really good reasons for saying what I'm saying, is if I help you see another model or help your brain, because it's not you really, that if the brain sees it and understands it, the only way that you will forget that is serious brain damage or death. And short of that, your brain will only put that aside if it's given a better model. and that has very much to do with surviving and thriving. But anyway, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. It gives me an insight into other ways of looking at something that I've looked at very, very much. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those questions and that discussion. That was really interesting. And Denise and Victoria, do you have any questions? I know Victoria has also in the background work going on, so I'm not sure if she's listening, but if she can answer. But Denise, I wanted to give you an opportunity before I ask another question. Thank you.
Thanks, Katerina. I joined late, so I wish I had a great question, but I don't at this time. So thanks for being here, Ari. Thanks, Katerina and Victoria, for hosting, and looking forward to more talks.
Yeah. So my question was about what do you think would maybe improve further the AI from your perspective, and based on the study, when I think about the example you mentioned, when you say something to a human, the human can remember it at least for a while, immediately. And I would say it has, there are different assumptions, but it's probably has to do with priming, using different neuromodulators that kind of enhance the short-term memory effect. Like in a cell would be type of an upstate phase that kind of during that time enhances the recording basically of that event. And I know there is already a reward system and things like that, but what do you think we should or not we, because I'm not doing that research, but one should implement in order to have that kind of immediate effect? Or would it even be helpful, or would it overwhelm the system basically if we would do it in a human-like way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as like the project that I talked about here represents work, in understanding gradient descent and how it changes networks. You can see a double-edged sword. You can see how how it might be good, what sort of helpful things that embodies, but also, as the previous question pointed to, what drawbacks does it have? And the ability to learn things quickly is one drawback, and there are others as well that I didn't mention here, like for example, like interference is a big problem if you just use gradient descent. If you learn one thing and then you switch over to learning something else, those changes tend to be overwritten, and that's pointing to another big difference between how we learn and how maybe just gradient descent and a big unstructured network learns. So, looking towards building better artificial intelligence systems, what researchers could do to draw inspiration from the way we learn is to address these problems. And I think that your suggestions, like how attention focuses learning, it gates learning, and it targets learning to only specific areas. That's something that is divergent from how AI systems are trained today. And there's great evidence that that's how we learn and how animals or mammals learn. And I anticipate that changes like that would not only be helpful for AI, but are probably necessary to not to overcome the obstacles that face them today.
Yeah, I have one follow-up comment / question, and then I wanted to give, if you still have time, the opportunity for Steve that joined the stage to ask a question. We learned last week from a speaker that came here, which was really interesting that we didn't know before, from cell molecular biology, that cells can use the genetic code differently to make different cell types and so on. But the interesting part was that they found a really big redundancy in even how the same cell type, let's say two liver cells, two uh, kidney cells, and so on, like that individual cell types in the same place have a redundancy, a pretty big one, how they use the genetic code to get to the same outcome. And we knew this kind of a little bit from neuroscience on a higher scale, but I wasn't aware that this is also now being recorded on a very deep molecular level. So is this sort of redundancy implemented in AI? And if not, do you think it would be, I know we are probably speculating a lot, but would that also, because I feel like it's a very main characteristic of like living adaptive beings to have this redundancy, but coming up with really good results, and it kind of builds resiliency and probably also adaptability.
Yeah, I would say yes and no. Yes, in that there's a large neural network. It's of course pretty hard to look into these and see how they're working because everything is shared across a large degree of artificial nodes and neurons in that network. Learning even simple tasks, it's spread among millions of connections. And so to some degree, yes, and yes, redundancy in that there are many, you could target or you could ablate a node in these large networks and nothing would really happen. Like it would sort of change the output a little bit, but it's robust to that sort of single edge deletion. Unlike say a calculator or like a transistor based system, there are some really crucial connections there that if you cut, the whole thing would stop. But on the other hand, redundancy also makes me think of modularity, where a single system, a single module for computation might be used over and over again in different contexts, which is sort of something we see like it in like cellular transcription, for example. There's there's all sorts of cellular processes that use the same materials for innumerable functions. And in the types of artificial neural networks that we have today, that sort of adaptable reuse of systems is not really done. It's not it's not how they work, and some people speculate that that's a major reason that they don't think and act like humans in certain ways. Like if you have a like procedural and repetitive application of abstract rules is something more like a symbol processing system, and it has strengths that are clear failures of the current types of large neural networks.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, and it's really interesting. But I want to give Steve welcome. Please ask your question. Thanks for waiting so patiently.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me on stage. So I looked, so one of your conclusion is that the learning algorithm, the efficient learning algorithm needs to the kind of coding, and particularly it seems that you mentioned especially the neural network learning algorithm, the gradient descent, is have played the probably the most important role here. Uh, what I want to say is, if you look at if I'm not sure you look at the other learning algorithms. So if I'm not sure the gradient descent, uh, um, maybe it's independent of the gradient descent. That is the
Mm,
main one I want to mention, and so that probably can be verified by looking at other algorithms, but also outside of any linear algorithm, just a long linear algorithm like the Hoffman coding, for example, it looks like the Hoffman coding seems to have most of the properties you mentioned. For example, one of the picture you mentioned, the most frequent sense will be learned first. If you look at the Hoffman coding, it's a deterministic, from engineers. The early days people did it. There's no linear there. It seems that does exactly that as well.
mm.
So, yeah, so I'm not sure, maybe, also, is my question clear if you
Yeah,
want to clarify anything?
no, that's great. Yeah, so two questions there, and I think we only studied gradient descent. I am also very curious to know the answer to that same question. What other learning algorithms have this property, and how general might we able to say something? It certainly wouldn't be all learning algorithms. Um, as we know, all learning algorithms have a certain preference to learn some things about the inputs first before others, and they those preferences will dictate what they're good at learning, uh, and something can't be good at all possible problems. So there's probably some small range or subset of uh, of, of of problems, um, or of of learning algorithms, and I'd love to know like what defines that subset, um, and you know crucially, like, does it include something that maybe the brain is doing? Uh, so I don't know. That's the first answer to the first question. I'd love to know. The second question, in relation to something like a Hoffman code, yes, like I think that's uh, it's an on point observation, and it's like that is an example of an efficient code for sure, in the presence of some constraints. So like when you're using a Huffman code, maybe you only have a certain number of bits that you're able to send over, and so that's that constraint. And we can talk about what are the optimal codes, and maybe it's hard to know the optimal code, but information theorists have come up with a large number of great compression algorithms that today underline information technology, and those would absolutely have this general property that the more frequent things are encoded better. So in information theory sense, that usually means like using a smaller number of bits, um, and it's I would place this in sort of one of two camps or two piles of theories that can explain why things have sort of systems, this sort of sensitivity profiles in proportion to frequency. One is the efficient codes using information theory, like the Huffman code. But learning algorithms may be a different thing, where it's like maybe that information channel isn't constrained at all. So the nervous system, but the brain doesn't need to use fewer bits, and it just happened to have learned more, gradually, or using some algorithm that preferentially learned things first. Um, Yeah. But yeah, thank you. That really exposes like the central paradigm, the comparison between paradigms here that's at the heart of the paper.
Great, thank you. I would love to connect with you offline. Thanks a lot for the
Thanks.
answer.
Send me
It's
a
great.
message. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, also I can connect both of you through email if you want. Just send me an email, Steve, and then yeah, I'll make the connection. And yeah, I wanted to check if anyone has some last questions. We've been going on for an hour and a half now almost. Or last comments, please share in the chat or raise your hand really quick. But in the meantime, I really think that Ari, like, first of all, thank you so much for sharing the time and explaining your work so
Thank
well.
you. Yeah, for the invitation. It's been fun.
And as I said, I think it has so many implications from learning how we should learn to, yeah, as I said, I think it argues for a broad education, but I think also to make like the best, like for kids, that they won't get frustrated, right, with learning, and maybe have a good experience for the future, because I think we will need to keep learning all of our lives. So to kind of adapt to their specific a preference of learning of different subjects, I think, your model maybe would argue for that too, so that there's not a long frustration time. We've kind of known that there are different ways of learning for different people. There are more audio people, visual. Some people have to, especially as kids, move around a lot while learning. I know that the Waldorf school system my oldest son was in Germany for a while, had that approach. Like they checked they observed the children for a while, and then my son was one of the kids that was supposed to walk around while learning vocabulary for a different language, for example, and it worked really well. Like he was supposed to walk around and then repeat the words of the new vocabulary. And so yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I wish you all the best for your work, because I think it's really important, and yeah, for all of us. So thank you and congratulations, and I'm
All right.
looking forward to follow your work. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, and thanks everyone for coming and participating. It's always way more interesting discussion if many people ask questions and share their thoughts. If you like discussions like this, follow the club. The next session will be with Dr. Cole about mitochondria clusters and interneuron myelination. So basically, it like positively correlates the concentration of mitochondria and the myelination density or amount in interneurons, which is really interesting, and it's really important to have good myelination in your life. So yeah, I hope I hear you all back soon, and thank you, Ari, again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope we'll hear you one day again, and you share with us updates. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, I'll close the room in 3, 2, 1. Thanks everyone. Thank you. Bye.